In 1967, Johnny Cash crawled into a cave, planning never to come out. His flashlight died deep inside, and he lay in complete darkness, waiting to die. But something happened in that cave that changed everything. Years later, in 2003, he filmed a music video that showed his body failing and his wife watching him with quiet love. She died just 4 months before he did. Between the cave and that final video was a secret battle nobody saw. Today, we're uncovering what really happened to the man in black. J.R. Cash came into the world on February 26, 1932, in Kingsland, Arkansas, right when the Great Depression was squeezing the last breath out of working families. He was the fourth of 7 children, and his parents were 2 poor cotton farmers who were trying to stay afloat. Ray Cash worked jobs for 15 or 20 cents an hour, sometimes earning no more than $2 a day. There were days he walked 3 miles to find work. Any work, just so his children could eat. They couldn't even settle on a name for their boy, so they just gave him initials, J.R., which stood for nothing at all. That boy was hauling water to cotton fields by the time he was 5 and picking cotton himself by age 8, singing in the fields because the rhythm helped dull the pain in his back. Those fields, that work, and that silence shaped him. In 1935, when J.R. was 3, the family moved to Dias Colony, a New Deal project set up in Mississippi County by Franklin Roosevelt's administration. It was designed to give poor families a second chance. They were given a 5-room house with no plumbing and 20 acres of mostly uncleared land. Clearing it by hand became the new job. Cotton was still the crop. If they worked hard enough and stayed long enough, they could own it. That dream kept people going. The colony tried to support itself with a cooperative hospital, a school, a china factory, even a mattress and toy factory. But most of that didn't last. What did last was the dirt, the work, and the lessons. J.R. grew up in that house wearing hand-me-down clothes, sometimes sleeping in the same bed as his brothers. Eventually, they bought out some abandoned land nearby and grew their farm to 40 acres. It was in that little house where his mother Carrie, a devout Pentecostal, began teaching him the gospel hymns that would stay with him his whole life. She had an old guitar and piano, and when she wasn't working, she taught her son to play and to believe that music was a gift from God. She saved money just to get him singing lessons, but after 3 classes, the teacher told her he didn't need them, said his voice was already perfect the way it was. He started writing songs at 12. He sang what he felt and wrote what he couldn't say aloud. After she died in 1991, he kept her old hymn book close. In 2003, months before he passed, he made a quiet little album called My Mother's Hymn Book, just his voice and his guitar, singing the hymns she once taught him, calling it the most important work of his life. But before music ever became a career, his life was shaped by something deeper and darker. His father, Ray, made no secret that his favorite was Jack, J.R.'s older brother. Jack was stronger, more serious, and had already committed to becoming a preacher at age 14. Every night, Jack would sit at the table reading the Bible while J.R. watched. People said Jack was destined. J.R., by contrast, was often scolded for being silly or careless. In the family's hardest moment, that difference grew into a wound that never healed. On May 12, 1944, Jack went to work at the school's agriculture shop, splitting logs into fence posts with an industrial saw. J.R. begged him to skip work and go fishing instead. He even brought 2 poles, hoping to change his brother's mind. Jack refused, said they needed the money. That day, the saw ripped through his body from abdomen to chest. He pulled himself off the table and crawled for help, making the injury worse. Some say a neighbor was with him and disappeared afterward. Johnny later said, "I always thought of it as murder." Jack didn't die right away. He lasted 8 days. At the end, he became lucid, said goodbye to each family member, then turned to his mother and said, "Mama, can you hear the singing? Do you see the angels?" When she said no, Jack said, "Oh, I do. How beautiful." Then he died at 6:44 a.m. on May 20th. Their father, Ray, turned cold. At the funeral, he stared at Johnny. At home, he shook an empty can and said, "You hear that? That's nothing. That's what you are." Johnny never forgot that. By 1950, just after turning 18, J.R. enlisted in the United States Air Force, adopting the name John R. Cash because the military didn't allow initials. He trained in Texas, first at Lackland, then Brooks Air Force Base, where they noticed his talent for hearing patterns in noise. He became a Morse code interceptor and could decode 40 words per minute. They sent him to Landsberg, Germany, with the 12th Radio Squadron Mobile, a Cold War unit housed in what had once been the very prison where Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. It was lonely work, secretive, repetitive, nerve-wracking, and the only call home was once a year. During this time, Johnny claimed to have intercepted and reported the first Western intelligence about Joseph Stalin's death on March 5, 1953, even before Eisenhower heard it. But not everyone believed it. Some colleagues later said he didn't know Russian and couldn't have decoded it. Still, Johnny clung to the story. He said, "I was the ace." The stress gave him insomnia, and the insomnia brought pills. At Landsberg, he bought his first guitar from the commissary and formed a group with fellow airmen called the Landsberg Barbarians. They played country and gospel at the mess hall and officer clubs. They recorded crude demos on a wire recorder. He began experimenting with rhythm, lyrics, and the baritone that would later become his signature. A fellow airman named C.V. White guarded his blue suede shoes like treasure. And when Johnny later told that story to Carl Perkins, it became a hit. Johnny also watched a prison film while stationed there, inside the walls of Folsom Prison, which planted the seed for one of his most iconic songs. He was honorably discharged on July 3, 1954, after 4 years. He returned to Texas and married Vivian Liberto, who had waited for him through 4 years and countless letters. They moved to Memphis, where he sold appliances door to door and took radio classes at Kaiser College. But civilian life didn't sit well with him. He'd gone from decoding Cold War secrets to selling washing machines. Something had to give. In late 1954, he met 2 mechanics, Luther Perkins and Marshall Grant, who played music on weekends. They clicked instantly. They called themselves the Tennessee Two. They practiced gospel, mostly. With his beat-up $5 German guitar, Johnny walked into Sun Records and auditioned for Sam Phillips. Phillips didn't care for gospel, told him it wouldn't sell. So Johnny came back with a song called Hey Porter, inspired by a train ride home, and another one called Cry, Cry, Cry. Phillips signed them. Cry, Cry, Cry sold over 100,000 copies in the South and reached number 14 on the Billboard Country chart. It got him a spot on the Louisiana Hayride Tour with Elvis Presley. Then came Folsom Prison Blues, written in Germany but recorded in Memphis on July 30, 1955. It came out that December with So Doggone Lonesome and climbed to number 4 country, number 17 pop. The line, "I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die," was written on purpose to shock. He later settled a lawsuit for about $75,000 because the song borrowed heavily from Gordon Jenkins's 1953 tune Crescent City Blues. In 1957, Cash released his first LP, Johnny Cash, with his Hot and Blue guitar, the first album Sun Records ever released. It had I Walk the Line, which stayed number 1 on country charts for 6 weeks and cracked the top 20 pop. That record recorded in the echo-heavy studio at 706 Union Avenue, used paper stuck under guitar strings to mimic a drum. No drummer, just grit. By then, he was outselling everyone at Sun, even Elvis. But things weren't good behind the scenes. In 1958, Johnny Cash walked out of Sun Records. He'd had enough. They were giving him 3% royalties when the standard was 5%, and Sam Phillips was more focused on Jerry Lee Lewis. But what really broke him was when they refused to let him record gospel. That wasn't just a creative whim. Gospel had always been part of who he was. He left for Columbia Records and right away recorded "Don't Take Your Guns to Town." It came out in December and hit #1 on the country charts, staying there for 6 weeks. It even crossed over to number 32 on the pop charts. He expanded his band from the Tennessee 2 to the Tennessee 3 when W.S. Fluke Holland joined as drummer in 1960. Holland had worked with Carl Perkins and played on Blue Suede Shoes. From that moment, that boom chicka boom sound was locked in. But before that, back in 1956, he'd written "I Walk the Line" backstage in Gladewater, Texas. He called it a pledge to his wife, Vivian Liberto. He was trying to stay faithful. He even messed around with his tape recorder, playing back guitar runs in reverse until he found a weird progression. The song hit #1 and stayed on the charts for 43 weeks, selling more than 2 million copies. But behind the scenes, it was already falling apart. By late 1956, he was taking pep pills, doctor-prescribed amphetamines, to get through tour life. The same year he released a song about loyalty, he was falling into infidelity and paranoia. His daughter Roseanne later said, he wrote, "I'm gonna stay true." Of course, that wasn't true. When he finally got to record gospel, he didn't do it sober. His second Columbia album, Hymns by Johnny Cash, came out in 1959. It was his gospel dream, but it was wrapped in darkness. By 1960, he was taking so many pills that he started losing his voice, canceling shows, and dropping weight. At 6'1", he went from 200 to 155 pounds. He had chronic laryngitis. People around him saw mood swings and dependency grow deeper. The songs about faith were being made by a man quietly unraveling. Even during his rise at the Grand Ole Opry, things weren't clean. He performed there for the first time on July 7, 1956, singing "I Walk the Line," "Get Rhythm," and "So Doggone Lonesome." That night, backstage at the Ryman, he told June Carter he'd marry her someday, while his wife Vivian and baby daughter Roseanne were at home. By 1958, he was all over national television, including The Jimmy Dean Show. But the drugs made him miss cues, act erratically. In 1965, he performed at the Opry under the influence, smashed stage lights with a mic stand, and got banned. That same night, he crashed his Cadillac and broke his nose for the 3rd time. By 1959, he and June Carter had started falling for each other while on the road. June told Rolling Stone, "I was miserable. I'm falling in love with somebody I have no right to fall in love with." Their affair burned quietly behind closed doors while he stayed married to Vivian. In 1963, Ring of Fire came out, co-written by June and Merle Kilgore. It topped the country charts for 7 weeks and reached number 17 on the pop charts. Vivian would later write that Johnny told her he gave June half credit for monetary reasons, because she needs the money. That lie didn't hold up. Vivian had already found June's love letters. They divorced in 1966. Around the same time, his addiction spiraled. He was taking up to 100 pills a day, amphetamines to stay awake, barbiturates to come down. In 1961, he wrecked a hotel in Vancouver and got banned. One night, he and his crew started firing Colt .45 pistols in the hallway just for fun. Cherry bombs down toilets became guns in corridors. His manager, Saul Holiff, who started in 1960, had to pay damages and clean up chaos. Yet, somehow, Cash kept recording hits. In 1966, right after performing in Toronto, he overdosed in his motorhome and was found virtually dead. June revived him. The same night he almost died, he had just come off stage. That pattern, brilliance and destruction walking side by side, wasn't rare. In 1964, he released Bitter Tears, a concept album about Native American injustice. Country radio stations refused to play it. He took out a full-page billboard ad asking, "Where are your guts?" It still sold about 500,000 copies. Songs like The Ballad of Ira Hayes raged against history, even while he himself was buried under pills. Then came the fire. On June 27, 1965, Cash was fishing in Los Padres National Forest with his nephew. His truck caught fire, either from a faulty exhaust, as he claimed, or from a campfire he started while high, according to his nephew. The blaze burned 508 acres of protected condor habitat. Only 4 of the 53 birds survived. The government sued him for $125,127.52. He showed up to court full of amphetamines and snapped, "I don't give a damn about your yellow buzzards." He was ordered to pay $82,000 plus interest. That nearly bankrupted him. Roseanne was born May 24, 1955. She spent her childhood watching him vanish during binges, reappear, then send guilt-soaked letters decades later asking her to forgive him. In 1966, Vivian waited in the Hollywood Bowl parking lot with their 4 daughters. He finished the show, said hi, then left with June. Vivian filed for divorce that year. In 1968, he proposed to June on stage in Ontario while still technically married. They married March 1, 1968. The very next year, The Johnny Cash Show launched on ABC, running from June 7, 1969 to March 31, 1971. It hit number 17 on Nielsen ratings. Bob Dylan appeared on the first episode. So did Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Louis Armstrong, and Stevie Wonder. Cash was still struggling with pills. He opened every episode with, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." Behind the greeting was a man still fighting withdrawal every week. But it worked. The show became a mix of music, activism, and outlaw spirit. In 1968, he recorded the legendary Folsom Prison Concert. It was January 13th, 2 shows that day in front of 1,000 inmates, armed guards watching from either side. The album went to number 1 on both country and pop charts, sold millions, and won 2 Grammys. His bassist Marshall Grant said Cash was about 75% straight that day. Years earlier, he'd been caught smuggling 1,000 amphetamines over the Mexican border in a guitar case. In 1969, he went to San Quentin and recorded another prison album that sold 3 million copies. During the show, he sang, "San Quentin, I hate every inch of you," nearly inciting a riot. He also performed A Boy Named Sue for the first time, which became his only number 1 adult contemporary hit. That same day, Jim Marshall snapped the famous middle finger photo during rehearsal. It later became the symbol of Cash's raw rebel image. When June gave birth to John Carter Cash on March 3, 1970, Johnny went clean for a while. He stayed sober for 7 years. He got baptized again in 1971 and released the album Man in Black, protesting war, poverty, and injustice. He once said, "The only good thing that ever came from war is a song, and that's a hell of a way to have to get your songs." But the truth was murkier. He secretly relapsed after breaking a rib in 1971 and kept using pills quietly for years. He performed around 30 prison shows in his life, starting in 1957 at Huntsville. He stayed in touch with prisoners, answered their calls, and testified before the U.S. Senate in 1972 alongside 2 ex-cons demanding sentencing reform. He talked about rape, suicide, and injustice inside prison walls. The FBI kept a file on him for over a decade. The New York Times called him the first grim and gutsy pusher of social causes. He gave $5,000 of his own money to build a chapel in Cummins Prison. In 1985, Cash teamed up with Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson to form the Highwaymen. Their debut album sold over 500,000 copies, and the title song hit #1. They played sold-out arenas. Behind all that, Cash had developed a morphine addiction. It started in 1983 after an ostrich at his Jamaica estate kicked him and broke several ribs. He was prescribed morphine and never truly stopped. On tour, he would hide in bathrooms between shows to take pills. His hands shook. His friends didn't know. He almost overdosed more than once during what looked like a comeback. In 1981, he starred in a CBS movie, The Pride of Jesse Hallam. It was about an illiterate coal miner fighting for education. It drew over 12 million viewers and was praised for highlighting adult illiteracy. But on set, Cash was in withdrawal. He forgot lines, broke down crying, and once hurled a chair across the room. His director said his pupils were dilated and he couldn't hold a pen. In 1970, Nixon invited Cash to the White House and asked him to perform songs like Okie from Muskogee. Cash refused. He sang What is Truth instead, a song defending anti-war protesters. Nixon's aides leaked stories calling him unpatriotic. But Cash didn't care. In 1972, he released an album with narration about Native genocide and labor rights. He later said he wore black to the White House to represent those who never get invited. Nixon never invited him again. In 1972, Cash released a family Christmas album that sold over 300,000 copies and hit #9 on Billboard's country chart. It was recorded with June and their kids. But during those same sessions, June found out Johnny had been sleeping with her sister, Anita Carter, since 1970. She found hotel receipts and snapped during recording, throwing decorations at him and screaming, "You're destroying this family." She left and stayed with her mother for 3 weeks. The affair only ended when Anita got married in 1974. Cash wrote, "Help me make it through the night," as an apology, but it ended up being recorded by Christopherson instead. In 1967, Johnny Cash walked into Nickajack Cave in Marion County, Tennessee, with no plan of ever coming out. His body was wrecked by years of amphetamine abuse, his voice was failing, his career was collapsing, and he had decided that this was where it would end. He crawled for hours into the twisting blackness of the cave system, a place so vast and confusing it had already claimed the lives of explorers before him. At some point, deep inside, his flashlight died. He was swallowed by complete darkness. Cash lay there on the cold rock floor and waited for death to come. But instead, he felt something else, a strange calm that he would later describe as divine intervention. "I realized I was not in charge of my destiny," he said. "I was going to die at God's time, not mine." Following the faintest hint of a breeze, he crawled blindly toward it, inch by inch, until light finally appeared through a crack. When he emerged, bruised and filthy, his mother and June Carter were waiting for him outside with a basket of food. On November 11, 1967, just months after that day in the cave, Johnny Cash walked onto a stage sober for the first time in more than a decade. It was a small high school gig, and he was terrified, but he discovered something he thought he had lost. The stage without drugs was not as frightening as he imagined. By February 1968, Cash had asked June Carter to marry him on stage in Ontario, and they were husband and wife a week later. Their duet, Jackson, won a Grammy, and soon the Johnny Cash Show made them America's favorite country couple. But the story behind the picture-perfect marriage was darker. During June's pregnancy with their son, John Carter, born in 1970, Cash continued an affair with her sister, Anita Carter. Robert Hilburn's 2013 biography revealed that the affair was an open secret within Cash's inner circle, but carefully hidden from the public and from his devout Christian fan base. It was especially scandalous because Cash had aligned himself with Reverend Billy Graham and built a reputation around faith and redemption. The betrayal never became public knowledge during his lifetime, and despite the wound it left, the marriage survived. They built a life together in a house overlooking Old Hickory Lake in Hendersonville, Tennessee, raising their blended family and trying to hold the pieces together. By Christmas 1983, Cash's addiction had dragged him back down. His family staged an intervention, and he checked himself into the Betty Ford Center for 43 days. He would later call that time the best 43 days of my life, a period of brutal self-examination and clarity. After rehab, he recorded Johnny 99 in April 1983, released on August 29th of that year. It featured Bruce Springsteen songs like Highway Patrolman and Johnny 99, and critics praised it as a strong record from a man in his weakest period. But praise didn't translate into sales. The album's only charting single, I'm Ragged But I'm Right, barely reached number 75. The worst blow came in 1986, when Columbia Records dropped him after 28 years. Since 1958, that label had been home to all his iconic work. Suddenly, Johnny Cash was without a label, without a direction, and, as he said later, professionally adrift. Over the next 7 years, he released 4 original albums, none of which found much of an audience. It wasn't until 1994, when Rick Rubin entered the picture, that Cash would find his footing again. Before that rebirth, though, there were moments that showed how deeply Cash's story had woven into American culture. On January 5, 1997, The Simpsons aired El Viaje Misterioso de Nuestro Homer, and the spirit guide in Homer's chili-induced hallucination, the Space Coyote, spoke with Cash's unmistakable voice. Many viewers never realized it was him. The role was deeply symbolic, mirroring Cash's own spiritual journey from the darkness of Nickajack Cave to a man who believed he'd been guided by something greater. It was also his last character role where he wasn't playing himself. The 1980s were unkind. Cash hadn't had a top 10 hit since 1978, and the slump crushed him. The depression and suicidal thoughts that haunted him in Nickajack Cave returned. From that darkness, the beast in me was born. It wasn't his song. Nick Lowe, once married to Cash's daughter Carlene, wrote it in 1979. Drunk one night, he sang a fragment of it to Cash, who recognized himself in the words. For years he asked Lowe about the song's progress, knowing it captured the war inside him between his darker urges and his gentler side. He finally recorded it for American Recordings in 1994. By then, Columbia had long dropped him, and he was seen as a relic. But The Beast in Me and the stark, haunting album it appeared on would bring him roaring back to relevance. That comeback began in Bob Dylan's orbit. After seeing Cash perform at Dylan's 30th anniversary concert in 1992, producer Rick Rubin reached out and offered something no one else had: complete creative freedom. They recorded American Recordings between May and December 1993, mostly in Rubin's Los Angeles living room and Cash's Tennessee cabin, with 2 tracks captured at Johnny Depp's Viper Room just 5 weeks after River Phoenix died there. Released on April 26, 1994, it peaked at number 17 on Billboard and won the Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album. Cash, 62, was recovering from another drug relapse and serious health problems during those sessions. He doubted a producer known for rap and heavy metal could revive his career. But the stripped-down sound reintroduced him to Generation X, kids who knew Johnny Cash only as a ghost from their parents' past. From that record came Delia's Gone, a murder ballad so dark it shocked even longtime fans. Directed by Anton Corbijn, the video starred supermodel Kate Moss as the murdered bride. Cash looked spectral, like something out of Bela Lugosi's worst morphine dreams. The song earned Grammy nominations and hit a nerve in a time obsessed with violent art. Natural-born killers, Nick Cave's murder ballads, Kurt Cobain's death. What no one knew was that Cash's body was failing fast. He was suffering from undiagnosed autonomic neuropathy, a disease that would define his final decade. When he sang Delia's Gone on David Letterman, even the host was struck silent. Then came Hurt, released on American 4. The Man Comes Around in 2002. Its video was filmed in February 2003, just 7 months before Cash's death. Director Mark Romanek shot it in the abandoned House of Cash Museum, capturing the decay and Cash's failing body with unflinching honesty. June Carter appears briefly, watching him with quiet love. She died on May 15, 2003. Johnny followed on September 12th, just 4 months later. The Hurt video was nominated for 6 MTV Video Music Awards, making Cash the oldest nominee ever at 71, and it won the Grammy for Best Short-Form Music Video. By 2017, it had sold over 2.1 million digital copies. The house where they filmed it burned down in 2007, but the video remains one of the most haunting farewells in music history. Not long before that, on June 26, 1994, Cash had stood before 100,000 people at Glastonbury Festival, likely the biggest crowd of his life. He wore his trademark black suit and was introduced by the Bishop of Bath and Wells, Reverend Jim Thompson, who had shown him sacred sites earlier that week. The crowd bellowed train sounds during "Let the Train Blow the Whistle," shouted back lines during "A Boy Named Sue," and roared with a kind of love Cash hadn't felt in decades. That performance, televised for the first time in Glastonbury's history, proved that the man in black could still command the hearts of a new generation. Thompson died the same week as Cash, in September 2003. By then, the American Recordings series had sold more than 5 million copies and fully resurrected a career once considered over. June's death hit him harder than anything else. She was 73 when she died, after complications from heart valve surgery at Baptist Hospital in Nashville. The procedure had been on May 7, 2003. By May 14th, she had suffered cardiac arrest and was placed on life support. Johnny had been hospitalized there too, and when she died, he was readmitted for observation. On July 5, 2003, less than 2 months after losing her, Cash gave his final public performance at the Carter family fold in Hiltons, Virginia. He was in a wheelchair, his voice weak and trembling, but he spoke before Ring of Fire. The spirit of June. Carter overshadows me tonight with the love she had for me and the love I have for her. She came down for a short visit, I guess, from heaven to visit with me tonight, to give me courage and inspiration like she always has. At 2 a.m. on September 12, 2003, Johnny Cash died at 71 from complications of diabetes that led to respiratory failure. He had just been released from the hospital after a 2-week stay for a stomach ailment. For years, he had battled autonomic neuropathy, which affected his stomach's ability to control acid. The acid built up and was forced into his esophagus and trachea, seeping into his lungs. Decades of heavy smoking had already blackened them. X-rays showed there were no pink spots left. That acid damage, on top of the ruined lung tissue, finally took him. Rick Rubin remembered Cash's words after June died, You have to keep me working because I will die if I don't have something to do." After his death, hundreds of tapes were discovered in a hidden room at the House of Cash estate in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Among them were recordings labeled Personal File from July 1973, featuring 49 unreleased tracks. Old American songs like Drink to Me Only with Thine Eyes, Missouri Waltz, Galway Bay, and I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen. His final recordings, including Like the 309 and Engine 143, were made on August 21, 2003, just weeks before his death. Cash's life had begun in uniform. He had served as a staff sergeant in the U.S. Air Force in Landsberg, West Germany, during the Cold War. He claimed to be the first American to intercept news of Joseph Stalin's death in March 1953, a story some biographers doubt, but one he repeated often.